Welcome back to our final part of our graphics card buyer's guide for 2017. Now today we're going to go through the GTX 1070 Ti versus the RX Vega 56 in the premium performance market segment. We'll also recommend our choice between the GTX 1080 Ti versus the RX Vega 64 liquid cooled edition for the enthusiast market segment. So let's get straight into it. So in the premium performance segment is the NVIDIA GTX 1070 Ti versus the AMD RX Vega 56. These cards target a 1440p resolution or ultra details at 1080p with high refresh rates. The GTX 1070 Ti comes with 8GB of memory and a memory bandwidth of 256GB per second, whereas the RX Vega 56 comes with 8GB of HBM2 memory and a memory bandwidth of 409GB per second. Now performance at 1080p with both cards at a stock configuration gives the 1070 Ti a 7% performance advantage across the 35 games tested by TechSpot or Hardware Unboxed. At 1440p, the 1070 Ti also has a 6% performance advantage over Vega 56. These results do not account for overclocking the 1070 Ti or undervolting Vega 56 and flashing the Vega 64 BIOS onto it. Now, we don't really find that important in this comparison. The reason being that as much as I really wish people would do these things to get the maximum performance out of their card, the truth is the majority of consumers just plug and play, or they do a small overclock. So with those things in mind, I'd say for performance, NVIDIA has a massive advantage here for being way better when you're just doing plug and play. Not to mention that with Vega 56, flashing a BIOS is much riskier than failing an overclock since you could potentially brick your card. So since NVIDIA doesn't have to do a BIOS flash and an undervolt to achieve a substantial improvement in performance, we think NVIDIA wins here on the performance front due to the ease and the well understood concept of overclocking, which has minimal risk. As for price, NVIDIA has another big advantage here. The cheapest 1070 Ti on Newegg is $450, and it's a Zotac open air model with 2 fans. Whereas Vega 56 costs $470 and it only comes in a blower style configuration. So with the 1070 Ti being cheaper, it makes much more sense to pick this if price is important. That too is another big disadvantage for AMD and Vega 56, which is that they just don't have any add-in board partner cards out there to compete with NVIDIA's 1070 Ti, which does have add-in board partner cards. So if you're going to be forced into a louder or hotter card with Vega 56's blower style stock cooler than you would with NVIDIA and the open air configurations that they have available, then NVIDIA wins here as well. Now the last disadvantage that AMD has is power consumption, where the stock 1070 Ti system drew 304 watts at stock versus the Vega 56 system, which drew 331 watts at stock. So a total of a 27 watt difference, with more power being used by Vega 56, which isn't too much of a difference, but it's still an advantage that NVIDIA has. Probably the last thing that really ruins Vega 56 is the lack of stock out there. It's pretty much really hard to get one, and NVIDIA's 1070 Ti just doesn't have this problem. It's really readily available and it's pretty much everywhere with lots of stock and options on the market. Basically, there is only one advantage to picking up Vega 56 over a 1070 Ti, and that is FreeSync. But when you have to compromise on performance, price, and the lack of add-in board partner cards, getting Vega 56 just seems really illogical over the 1070 Ti. That is, if you can even find one on the shelves. So unless any of these factors change, we recommend that you go out and pick up a 1070 Ti and go on your merry way, because Vega 56 and its horrible launch has only created problems for it, and really AMD has created these problems all on their own, so you can only really blame them. And it doesn't really take much of a genius to see that the 1070 Ti is just the more logical choice over the competition. Therefore, our pick in this segment is the NVIDIA GTX 1070 Ti, so go out and pick one up if you're looking in this market segment. In the enthusiast segment, NVIDIA has the king of the hill, the GTX 1080 Ti, and it's up against the AMD RX Vega 64 liquid cooled card. Now these cards target 4K at 60 FPS, or at least they try to in games, if they can. Now, the GTX 1080 Ti has 11GB of GDDR5X memory with a memory bandwidth of 484GB per second, and AMD's RX Vega 64 has 8GB of HBM2 memory with a memory bandwidth of 483GB per second, so a small difference. Now, performance at 1440p with both cards at a stock configuration gives the 1080 Ti an 18% performance advantage. Not much to really say about that. Now, when it comes to price, you can find a GTX 1080 Ti with 3 open-air fans for $740 on Newegg with a free copy of Destiny 2. Vega 64 liquid-cooled will cost $700 on Newegg, with some liquid-cooled Vega 64s running all the way into $800 or $900. This means that the 1080 Ti will cost 5% more than the cheapest Vega 64 liquid-cooled edition, but it's well worth it when you see that it performs 18% better. So you're actually getting a way better deal for the money if you were to purchase the 1080 Ti over the liquid-cooled Vega 64 card, as you get a free game and that increased performance. Now, power consumption is another huge difference between these cards. The 1080 Ti system consumed 391 watts, whereas the Vega 64 liquid-cooled system consumed 485 watts. That's a massive 94 watt difference, which is significant enough for us not to recommend Vega 64 if power is really expensive in your country. Overall, the 1080 Ti, which is just shown to be the performance king and the best pick for enthusiasts, has obviously kept that title. Now, Vega 64 liquid cooled just has way too many caveats, and with these being the price, performance, and the power consumption, it's just way too hard to recommend over the 1080 Ti. Therefore, our choice for enthusiasts is to pick up the Nvidia GTX 1080 Ti if you're looking in this market segment. Now, for our honorable mentions section, we have the GTX 1070 and the GTX 1050 Ti, both from Nvidia. Now, while the 1070 would have normally competed with Vega 56 and lost, the 1070 Ti came along and just absolutely destroyed Vega 56's chances. So if we made this video on Vega 56's release, things probably would have been in Vega's favor, but lack of stock, lack of add-in board partners, and the 1070 Ti's release meant that Vega 56 ended up losing the war. As for the GTX 1050 Ti, it's in between the GTX 1050 and the GTX 1060 obviously, and while this card would normally compete with the RX 560 4GB card, it actually beats it in most cases. I actually made a review comparing both Asus Strix models of the 1050 Ti and the RX 560 4GB and the 1050 Ti won in basically every category. So whether it was price to performance or just performance overall or even cooling and power consumption, it just beat it in everything. This concludes our graphics card buyer's guide for 2017, and really it was kind of a wash after you left the entry-level market, since Nvidia had every advantage, with the company getting hit less by the mining boom and having much smoother launches. Now, as much as I hate to see Nvidia having a monopoly, it's just the way things are, and I can't really see it changing, with AMD slipping further and further in performance to Nvidia as each generation passes. I mean, think of it this way. 4 years ago, we went from, the 290X beating the GTX 780 to an air-cooled GTX 1080 Ti absolutely thrashing Vega's top card when it's underwater by almost 20%. But unfortunately, that's just the way things are. So hopefully in 2018, things can be a little bit different, but we highly doubt it here at Voltec. If you enjoyed this video, guys, leave a like, subscribe to get more content like this. We have a link to our Patreon in the description below if you want to help us out. Comment your thoughts in the comments section, and we'll see you in tomorrow's video. Until then, we'll catch you later.